gender roles. Most of us know what these simplistic gender roles are. And now they're obviously changing, as Tyler was pointing out. But the classic differences between men and women. Men are aggressive, strong, dominant, competitive, hairy, sexually oriented, obsessed about work, unemotional. Women, caring, nurturing, soft, weak, emotional, oriented towards children. In the old days when I was a kid, people talked about boys are snips and snails and puppy dog tails and girls are sugar and spice and everything nice. All of those are what are called gender roles. The behaviors that society associates with that biological factor, male or female. And they can change. But notice something about that description is that it is what's called bipolar. Bipolar means if men are strong, women are weak. If women are emotional, men are unemotional. That's a bipolar gender role organization. They are the opposite of each other. So, where does that come from? Well, first off, what are the consequences of that? That particular form of gender role organization, and that's known as the traditional gender role. We'll talk more about cross-cultural comparisons here in just a second. But we do know that that is the most common pattern cross-culturally. Not the only pattern, we'll talk about that as well. But it is the most common pattern cross-culturally. Where does it come from? Who wins, who loses from that? Overall, if you took a look objectively at that set of roles, who benefits most from the organization? Men. Men. Measured in terms of income, who makes more money, men or women? Men. Measured in terms of who gets the most political power? Men. Who has the greatest social status? Men. And in things like, and you should know this concept, I'm going to test you on it, so you're going to write it down in the book. Double standard. Who benefits from the double standard? Men. Mostly men. We'll talk about some situations where women benefit. What's a double standard? A double standard is where if males do something, they are legitimate in doing so, whereas females doing the exact same behavior are criticized. Men are measured by a different standard even when it comes to the same behavior. The classic example of these is twofold. First, in terms of sexuality. What do you call a male that is highly sexually active? A player, a stud, a real male. Lucky. What do you call a female who is highly sexually active? A whore, a slut. Which one of those is more negative? Well, obviously slut. But they're both engaged in the same behavior. That's a double standard. I mean, it doesn't make any rational sense. It's okay for men to be sexually active, but not women. Who are men supposed to be sexually active with? Like in the old days. Men were men and sheep were worried. So, that's one example. Another example has to do with behaviors in regards to political power. What do you call a male who's aggressive, competitive, power-oriented? Boy, that's a natural-born leader. What do you call a competitive, aggressive, power-oriented woman? She's a bitch. She's a bitch. For many Americans, there is a picture of a bitch. Hillary Clinton. How come? Because she is competitive, aggressive, and power-oriented. Every bit as much as her husband was. Bill Clinton, however, was admired for that. He was, he's often referred to as the big dog. He was the big dog. He was the one who was taking over. Yet Hillary, every bit as competitive as her husband, and probably more competent than him. But she gets criticized for the exact same behavior we admire in Bill Clinton. Come on, who wins from this gender role division of labor? Pretty obviously, it's men.
Couldn't that also be attributed to tradition, though?
Pardon?
Couldn't that also be attributed to tradition, where we're always focused on men and not focused on women?
Yeah. The focus has traditionally been on men. We're much more concerned about men. Women are kind of a secondary category left over after we pay a lot of attention to men. You can see this even in terms of our attitudes towards little kids. And also female sexuality. I mean, to watch two women holding hands or something like that, that's just women. But two guys holding hands, ooh. And the reason for that is we pay a lot more attention to male sexuality than female sexuality. Women are kind of an empty category in that area. We put a lot more social status on being male than female. You can even see that with little kids. What do you call a little boy that acts like a little girl? Sissy. What do you call a little girl that acts like a little boy? Tomboy. Which one of those is more negative? Oh, sissy. They're the same thing sociologically. They're just violating gender roles. Yet we feel more uncomfortable with a little boy acting like a little girl for the simple reason we devalue girls.
Wouldn't that be the opposite?
All right, who wins in terms of money? We already talked about that. Who wins in terms of divorce? Actually, this is a little surprising. Money-wise, men win from divorce. Even if they pay the amount of child support they're supposed to, they still have more discretionary income after divorce than before. Now, they still, in most cases, they don't pay the child support. All right, so men win, women lose. But you can find a few cases where women win as a result of this traditional gender division of labor and men lose. Places like physical health. Who tends to be more physically healthy, men or women? Women. Women do. Who lives longer? Women. You almost look at any age group survival rate. Neonatal survival rates. Little kids born with certain kinds of defects. If it's a little girl, her odds of surviving are better than a little boy. Who resists pain better, men or women? Women. Yeah. Women will complain about it more because of their gender role. It's acceptable for them to admit they feel pain. But if you measure the objective response to pain and not just ask about it, that's typically, you'll give them, you use electricity because that's easy to measure. Just give a shock and then measure the physical response. Heart rate, how much you sweat, blood pressure, that's an objective measure of response to pain. Women consistently do better at resisting physical pain than men. For the simple biological reason of what? Childbirth. Yeah, childbirth. For most of human history, there's been no anesthesia. And natural selection says women are going to be better at resisting a lot of physical pain as a result. Okay, so that's the generalization. Men win, women lose, but there are some cases where women benefit from these traditional gender roles. But let's ask that next question. Where does it come from? Where do these gender roles come from? And this is the big debate we've already seen. It's the debate between nature versus nurture. And the question really becomes, can we reduce gender to sex, given that previous definition? That is are these sets of behaviors innate, born into it, part of that hormonal structure that comes with biology? That's the debate. Or is it socialization, society training us? Aggressive boys given tools and guns as little kids, girls given dollies and stuffed animals. Is that what's creating those differences? We get now transgender society creating different statuses of gender that didn't exist before. Or is it just a simple matter of biology? Probably the closest to truth is it is a mixture of both. There is probably a push from biology. I keep trying to find ways of measuring this. The classic piece of research was of little babies before they could learn to speak. The search was for the so-called tabula rasa. We were trying to find a place where socialization has had no impact. So we could see what's innate, what's biological. Well, one of the things you might try and do is take a look at very young children before they learn to speak. And see if there's any behavioral differences, even at this very young age. And the argument will be that if they can't speak, they haven't learned to talk yet, they haven't been socialized. So now we've got our blank slate, which we can check and see for biologically motivated behavioral differences. So they tried this with the little babies. They're crawling, but not yet walking, and therefore not yet talking either. and they put them on the other side of a clear barrier, a plexiglass barrier they could see through. But on the other side of the barrier was something that little kid desperately wanted. Little boy baby crawls up to that barrier, can't get over or under it to get the toy. What does he do? Bangs on the barrier. Bang, 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 bang. Little girl baby crawls up to the same barrier, can't get over, can't get under it. What does she do? Cries. Cries. Boys bang, girls cry. What does that prove? Well, the claim is this: it must be innate, it must be biology, it must be nature, therefore, that kind of stuff. But you can always go back further and find other places where socialization doesn't just begin with language. We know from the moment of birth, little boys are wrapped up in blue blankets, little girls in pink ones. We behave differently with them depending upon what we think to be their gender or sex. All right, what do we know about cross-cultural evidence? Most societies follow that more traditional pattern. That bipolar organization with men competitive, aggressive, women caring and nurturing. But not all societies have. And probably the most famous research was done by an anthropologist by the name of Margaret Mead. And she is on page 263 in your book. You can see a picture of her. 263. She went out and found some very different societies in terms of gender roles. She claimed to have found a couple of societies in which were unipolar, not bipolar. In other words, everybody was alike. Baby cries. Who picked it up? Male or female? Whoever was closest. Both genders nurturing and caring of children. She claimed to find a society in which everybody went to war. Both genders aggressive and warlike. And she even claimed to find a society that was bipolar, and there was a caring, nurturing gender, and there was a competitive, aggressive one. But the competitive, aggressive one was females, and the nurturing one was males. So, the thing to keep in mind when it comes to Margaret Mead, well, this evidence is one of the most dramatic in terms of finding societies that do gender roles differently. Her methods of research have been criticized. She was an anthropologist, and a big deal for anthropologists what are called their ability to do ethnographies. And that means to really learn the culture they're studying, which means learning the language, learning their way of life, spending a lot of time with the culture, become part of that culture. Margaret Mead was sometimes referred to as an airport anthropologist. I mean, she'd fly into an airport, get out, wander around for a few months, and get right back again. Not great. Not great. So her research was the most dramatic, has been criticized. Other anthropologists who've done better research methods, better ethnographers, who know the culture better, learn the language better, have found not quite as dramatic differences as she found, but they have found different societies with different gender role organization. So, what does this imply? Because the majority of societies do have a fairly traditional gender role organization, it implies there's probably a push from biology. But because at least some significant minority of societies do it very differently, it implies that if there is a push from biology, it is not destiny. There's a famous statement from Sigmund Freud who said, biology is destiny. Nah. It's a push, but not a hard one.